around the accountable officer letter for the submission of the annual plan. I think, and I thank board members for making it at very short notice, and apologies for a slightly late start. Zoom has been playing up rather. First of all, any apologies? Do we have, can somebody give me the apologies?
We have apologies from Anne-Louise Ferguson, Nicola Matthews, and Nuria Zoll, and Raj Krishnan.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And do we have any declarations of interest on today's agenda? I'm taking that as a no. Thank you very much. Are there any other urgent items not otherwise on the agenda for today's meeting? No, great. So we will move to the business of the meeting, which is the annual plan. And the reason we are calling this, the number that we have hasn't changed since January. Darren provided us with some early figures. And the board was very clear at that point and throughout the last 5 months that there are two things that the board is focused on. Firstly, a route to break even, and secondly, a route to delivery. And the board is absolutely clear that whatever we say, we must then deliver, and we have been absolutely clear about that throughout. The plan that was at 50.1 million deficit in January already had risk. And Darren made that very clear to us in January, and PFC also made it very clear because they had scrutinised it in some detail. But given the unacceptability of a 50 million deficit, the board instructed Darren to work up further thematic options for reducing that figure closer to the number that we declared at the end of last financial year of 17 million. And over the past 5 months, he and the finance team have done that. But in the meantime, as board members know, month one outturn has demonstrated the crystallisation of the risks that were described in the original plan. And the board will remember both Performance and Finance Committee and at the in-committee board last week, this situation was debated at length. I just want to go back to the board's two priorities, break even and reality. The board asked Richard last week to outline what could be done to address the reasons underlying the position in month one, and Richard was able to articulate an approach that had already been discussed in the executive team upon immediately receiving the results at the end of month one. The board was supportive of the approach that Richard set out. We've of course now we were asked when we submitted the plan at the end of March, we were asked to submit a revised AO letter by the end of May. So this meeting is when the board needs to instruct Richard on what should go into that AO letter. So I'm going to start by asking Darren for his professional opinion on the forecast outturn and how we've got here. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you, Chair. So as Director of Finance, my advice to the board is formulated on the basis that the delivery of the current 50.1 million forecast actually requires a number of key issues to be addressed before we can improve it, and you've touched on some of those in your introduction. Firstly, there's an emerged variance from the plan in month one, and that variance needs to be recovered. Secondly, the run rate above the plan needs to be addressed at pace, prospectively. And finally, the planned savings programme, which is featured in the plan at the value of 26.1 million since the outset, needs to be delivered in full. And as a consequence of the above and the construct of those issues, my professional advice to the board is that I cannot at this stage forecast a year-end outturn of less than 50.1 million deficit. I have further work planned, and I'm meeting with Welsh Government and the Finance Planning and Delivery Directorate next week, where we will go through this in a huge amount of detail, and that will be the next steps from a professional finance scrutiny position, Chair.
Thank you, Darren. Before I ask Richard for his thoughts, does anybody have any questions for Darren? Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Darren, at the board in committee last week, we tested a couple of things. One was there any appetite in Welsh Government for a delay on this submission. And I think you said you were going to have some try some discussions to test that appetite. And the second part of that question is, from what you've just said, even if there were a delay, let's say to the end of June, you don't think your advice would be any different if we were in a position that, you know, if we were looking to submit this letter at the end of June instead of the end of May?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I respond?
Yes, please. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, so I have had a preliminary conversation with Finance Planning and Delivery Directorate colleagues in the NHS Executive, Steve. There's no appetite for a delay based on the previous formal correspondence in terms of your letter from Nick Woods. I think that was the 3rd of May, which said we needed to submit tomorrow. So there's no appetite to change that. And from my perspective, again, from a professional perspective, we need a significant range of additional actions to be in place with confidence to allow me to be able to make that adjustment. And I think we'll need longer than a 3 or 4 week extension to do so. I think we need to formulate our strategy, cost that, work with the NHS Executive and Welsh Government, and then reflect on a number at that point. So a further extension, certainly 4 weeks, would not significantly change where we are.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions for Darren? No? Richard, so what you're saying is that whilst 50.1 is not what we want, and clearly is not what we want, and it wasn't what we wanted in January, which is why we asked you to have another look at it, but it is, as we see it at the moment, despite the crystallisation of risks, if we start to address the run rate, it is deliverable just. And secondly, because of the way in which we would need to do it, which is by reducing the run rate, that would take us into a better position by the end of the year in order to be able to see that route through to break even that we are so very keen to do. Darren?
Yeah, perhaps if I can paint that picture in numbers, Chair, that might be helpful. So in order for us to hit next year with a run rate that we predicted, that would need to be running at about £2 million a month of variance. That would be about 24 million, 25 million opening deficit. Month one position was 9.5 million, and that was 4.2 million of plan, 3 and a bit million of operational pressures, and 2 and a bit million of savings that were not being delivered. So when I just gave my advice was based on the fact that we need to address the run rate and the savings to get down to planned levels. That needs to happen quickly to recover the variance already in the plan at month one. But as we formulate that work, we also then need to identify other schemes to take us under the 4.1 million run rate that's the plan, to allow us to get down to the 2, which sets us up well for next year and recovers the start of the year into a much lower position at the end. And that then could be a 50 million outturn or better, but at this stage we need those plans for me to be able to advise the board differently.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Sorry, not Richard, Darren, that's very clear. Richard, your thoughts? Yeah,
so a couple of thoughts. Thanks, Chair. It was clear back in January when the plan was first received that the 50.1 it was not and is not itself without risk. And unfortunately, that risk materialised in month one in the way that month one overran significantly. And that's made the challenge all the greater. And while there were a number of actions in place to look at thematic areas of opportunity, there have been additional opportunities identified, but we've needed to allocate those to mitigate the risk of delivery of the 50.1 rather than changing the forecast. So that's important to note that there has been work ongoing. That's been progressing at pace, further opportunities identified, but it's the month one position that's the greatest concern to us. Just important as well, and I know the board are familiar, that once the month one position came out, we took immediate action to seek assurance on action has been taken and oversight from our service groups about their financial positions, delivery of their savings plans, and escalation should their savings plans and their run rate not conform to what's being expected every month. And we've extended that. I've asked for some specific themes to be undertaken by the executive team, looking particularly at where the areas of risk emerged around month one, around things like variable pay. And in the last week or 10 days, we've extended those. And the purpose of taking that action now is to be really clear, is to take immediate action on those risks and to reduce that run rate and to mitigate the risks of those run rates as soon as we possibly can. We will be establishing a run rate reduction team to oversee this, anticipating that team will be in place by the week commencing the 10th of June. But clearly, given the urgency of the situation, wanted to progress with some of this work before that run rate team getting established so that we've got some traction on the issues ahead of that plan. That all said, in my role as accountable officer, I can't support the forecast position because that's not acceptable. So I'm therefore seeking the board's direction and instruction regarding the submission of the accountable officer letter and the plan to Welsh Government, which is required by tomorrow, the 31st of May. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Any thoughts? It would be particularly useful just to get your the perspective of Performance and Finance Committee, Rena, or indeed Steve. I'm not sure Jean's still managed to join us actually. Just because I know that you've been dealing with, you've seen this each month as it's gone through. I know the board discussed it last week, but just to get that perspective. Can you hear me, Rena? Or Pat, indeed? Or Steve? Steve, thank you.
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if the other members can. Yeah, I mean, so the board, I think the PFC would reluctantly advise the board that this plan should be accepted, but I underline the word reluctantly. We haven't seen a draft of the AO letter yet, but I think it'd be interesting to get the perspective. I think it will be helpful if that letter summarised the attempts that we're going to make to reduce first the risk in that planned deficit, but also perhaps to reduce the deficit itself. So the run rate reduction team, etc. These sorts of actions that the board is being told by the executive are in place or are about to be put into place, that those things are communicated to Welsh Government officially.
Yeah, thank you. Rena.
Yeah, I just would endorse what Steve has said. And in particular, I think it would be useful for the accountable officer letter to outline what we are doing different this year in terms of ensuring that that run rate is concentrated on, and we are trying to, if you like, minimise the risk in that 50.1, as well as saying what we will be looking at in the future. But given where we are and given what we know, and particularly in terms of the first month's performance, then I think it would be foolish at this point to if you like, put forward a case to Welsh Government where we're not confident that we could deliver it. And I think delivery is all important. And I think we have credibility in terms of delivering on our previous financial year's forecasts. And I think, as I said, that's where we are at the moment. But obviously, it's not that we're not trying to do something different and actually try and reduce that. But I think it is realistic in terms of where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. Richard?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, that's an important point, actually. So to be clear, the primary role initially of that and the focus of that run rate reduction team will be to look at arresting the current spend and to bring that back in line with the trajectory that we need for the year end. And to do that within the timescales that Darren has previously outlined or before. It's important also to acknowledge, given the scale of that deficit, that simply run rate reduction in year, the run rate reduction will get to a position at the end of the year, but as the Chair outlined at the top of the meeting, what we want to be clear on is that we deliver a position to break even. And doing that is work that's going to need to start now in order to deliver on that within the next IMTP, within the next 2 or 3 years. So I will be discussing with Jan Williams as the incoming chair the process for what we're currently doing around run rate reduction, but more importantly, it's that route to sustainability. So it's how we therefore get down to a sustainable position rather than a position where we're delivering in year, but actually we've got an underlying deficit. It's absolutely critical that we start that now. And so that work will start, and we will then need to consider how we dovetail those two aspects, the immediate and the short term, alongside the medium and the long term, to address the underlying issue rather than just the run rate as it exists at the minute. I hope that's clear.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Pat?
Yeah, just to agree wholeheartedly with Richard, really, that, what we're trying to do is reverse the run rate risk and do that on a recurrent basis, and also make £26 million of the cuts to achieve the 50.1 million deficit. But these need to be recurrent savings. We've been quite good at making savings in year, but it's that sustainability, I think, that we need to focus on, really.
Thank you, Pat. And just to be clear, the figure we're putting in ties back to the annual plan and the trajectories that we have agreed with Welsh Government for RTI. Is that right? Can I just be clear about that? Nerissa?
Yeah, so what we'll be submitting tomorrow will be the accountable officer letter, as we've just been describing, the narrative that we submitted previously on the plan, so that ties back. An unchanged MDS on the financial elements of the plan, but we will be updating the ministerial templates to reflect the stretch targets that are in the Nick Wood letter of the 3rd of May. So I'll bring in Deb to describe what those mean operationally, but essentially we've looked at the detail of that and think it is achievable within the deficit plan that we're submitting.
Deb?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, so we've looked at the mathematics of what we were tasked with delivery through the targeted intervention, and bringing that forward into December 24 rather than March 25 mathematically is the same. So obviously we lose a cohort of patients if we're delivering it sooner, and then the numbers that we have to do each month are really unchanged. So if we've committed to do it in March, we can commit to do it in December.
Right, and you've answered my next question, which is that if we didn't commit to do it, would we be able to save some money? And the answer is no, because it's still within the year. Got you. Okay, fine. Any other questions or thoughts? No? Okay, so as I read the conversations that I've heard, I think we are of the view that much as we don't like this number, it is important that we are transparent about what we can deliver alongside the ministerial targets, and that as things stand, and to be fair, as things have stood since January, that figure is the 50.1. I think we're also clear that the 50.1 requires a significant reduction in run rate, but you have described an approach that will achieve that and possibly beyond over time, Richard, and that will take us forward to achieving break even over the next 2 to 3 years. I think we've also heard that seeking an extension is neither wanted nor likely to change the position. So I am thinking that while none of us are content with this position, I think the board's instruction, and I'm looking round board members as I say this, is that you should submit an AO letter confirming our end year forecast of 50.1, recognising that this won't be welcome and that we need to continue to work to reduce it, but also recognising that it's a realistic assessment of our position and that it will deliver a significant improvement on the underlying performance that will take us towards break even. Have I summarised that correctly? I'm seeing nods. Okay, thank you very much. Richard and Darren, have you got enough there to draft the AO letter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Fantastic.
Thank you. I'm grateful for
Okay,
the clarity.
so I would like board members to, I'd like that to be circulated to board members when it's sent. I think it will be on the basis of today's discussion, but board members will need to see it at the same time as it's sent to Judith. Excellent. Thank you all very much. Sorry to ask you to for yet another board meeting, but it's quite an important one. Thanks
Thank
very
you very
much
much.
indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.